There is a photograph taken somewhere in Japan, 1945. A young man, maybe 19, sits in the cockpit of a Zero fighter. He is wearing a white Hachimaki headband. He is smiling, not with grim resolve, but the way someone smiles when a camera is pointed at them and they do not know what else to do with their face in a moment that large. He flew the mission the following morning. His target never appeared through the overcast. He turned around and landed. He lived to be 83 years old, and he never once spoke about it publicly. If you want to keep exploring the darker side of history, subscribe to The Silent Front. That silence is where this story begins. The word kamikaze means literally divine wind. It comes from a pair of typhoons that destroyed Mongol invasion fleets off the coast of Japan in 1274 and again in 1281. The storms were credited with divine intervention, and the name survived for 7 centuries. By 1944, Japan had a war desperate enough to need it again. The island-hopping campaign had severed supply lines across the Pacific, and American air power was dismantling the Imperial Navy from above. The Japanese High Command looked at the strategic situation and concluded that conventional warfare could no longer produce the attrition rates needed to deter an American invasion of the home islands. What they arrived at was not a new concept in military history, trading one asset for one enemy asset, in a context where the enemy had far more assets to lose. The logic was cold. In the conditions of late 1944, it was not entirely without strategic basis. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi is generally credited with formalizing the program. He commanded the first air fleet in the Philippines in October 1944, and when the Battle of Leyte Gulf made clear that Japan's surface navy was finished as a fighting force, he called a meeting. He told his men what he believed the situation required. He asked for volunteers. Every hand went up. That part of the story is well documented. What receives far less attention is what happened to the men whose hands went up and who still came home. The mission structure was direct. A pilot would take off carrying a bomb, sometimes attached directly to the fuselage, sometimes carried in the conventional position, locate an American warship and dive into it. The pilot, the aircraft, the fuel, and the weapon were intended to function as a single guided munition. But what the program's planners did not fully account for was the failure rate that had nothing to do with enemy action. Weather-aborted missions, mechanical failures turned aircraft back before they reached the fleet. Some pilots lost their targets in overcast and returned to base. Some were intercepted by escort fighters before reaching their objectives. Some became disoriented over open ocean and landed wherever they could. The precise numbers are contested. Japanese wartime records are incomplete, and post-war accounts conflict on key figures. But the scale of the program makes one thing clear. Not every man who took off on a Toko mission died. Thousands volunteered. Hundreds flew multiple sorties before the war ended. Some flew a dozen missions without ever finding a valid target. Each time they returned, they were told to try again. That dimension of the program does not fit easily into the established narrative, which is likely why it tends to be omitted from it. What returning actually meant requires some examination. When a pilot was accepted into a Toko unit, the Tokotai, or Special Attack Corps, he went through a process that was both formal and total. He received a ceremonial cup of sake. He composed a death poem. In many cases, he sent a lock of hair and a nail clipping home to his family. Traditional farewell tokens in Japanese custom. In the eyes of his commanding officers, his unit, and the state, he was already dead. The administrative and psychological machinery of the program had processed him as a man who no longer existed among the living. Then the mission was aborted. Weather. A mechanical fault. No target in range. He landed the aircraft and climbed out of the cockpit. And there he was, standing on an airfield in front of men who had already mourned him, with no coherent framework, military or psychological, for what he now was. Accounts from pilots who survived multiple aborted sorties describe a condition that resists easy categorization. It was not survivor's guilt in the clinical sense that requires surviving a specific event. It was closer to a sustained suspension. They had passed through the threshold and had not crossed it, and neither they nor anyone around them had language for what that meant. The military response was not reflective. If weather cleared, they flew again. If it did not, they waited. They slept in the same barracks. They ate the same meals. They waited for the next opportunity to complete what the program considered an unfinished obligation. Some pilots wrote letters during those intervals that survive today in Japanese archives and in family collections. The letters are not what one might expect from men in that position. They are specific and mundane. Requests for certain foods, questions about younger siblings, complaints about the cold. The ordinary texture of a life that had formerly been declared finished, reasserting itself in the intervals between sorties. One pilot, whose name appears only in fragments across the historical record, wrote to his mother asking whether the plum tree in the garden had bloomed yet. 3 weeks later, he flew again. He missed his target in low visibility and returned to base. He flew again 2 weeks after that and did not return. The letter about the plum tree is what survived. The pilots who lived to the actual surrender in August 1945, not through repeated aborted missions but through the program's inability to use them before the war ended, represent a specific and historically awkward category. By the final months of the war, the program had absorbed so many volunteers that there were not enough aircraft remaining to fly them all. Japan's fuel shortage had become severe enough that training flights were being curtailed to preserve what remained for attack sorties. Some men had been formally accepted into Toko units and were waiting for aircraft when the Emperor's broadcast came through the radio on August 15, 1945. The war was over. And these men, who had performed the full ritual of departure, who had said their goodbyes, who had written their death poems, had to determine how to continue living. There is no precise word in Japanese or English for what that transition required of them. Post-war Japan was not an environment that made this transition straightforward. The country underwent a rapid and disorienting transformation. Military values were formally dismantled. War crimes trials proceeded publicly. The emperor renounced his divine status in a radio address that struck a population that had organized its entire moral framework around that claim. The war and everything associated with it became something many Japanese preferred to set aside rather than examine. The Toko survivors occupied an uncomfortable position within that national project. They were not war criminals. They had not committed atrocities, but they were living reminders of a system that Japan was actively trying to process and, in many cases, to quietly archive. The Special Attack Program had been presented during the war as evidence of Japanese spiritual superiority, a willingness to die that exceeded American willingness to survive. After surrender, that same willingness was reframed in official and public discourse as evidence of military coercion. Young men manipulated by a brutal command structure into volunteering for their own deaths. Both framings contained partial truth, which made it very difficult to be a man who had sat in that cockpit, worn that headband, chosen it, and then had to account for what that choice said about him in a country that had changed the terms of the accounting. Many chose not to speak, not to their families, not to researchers, not to journalists. The silence was not straightforwardly shame. The experience was specific enough and distant enough from ordinary frameworks for understanding war that language kept failing the men who attempted to use it. One survivor, Kenichiro Unuki, who wrote about his experiences late in life, described returning from an aborted mission and feeling, for the first time, genuinely frightened. Not of dying, he had reached a settlement with that. He was frightened of what it meant to still be alive when the entire logic of his situation indicated he should not be. That fear did not resolve when the war ended. It changed form. It remained. There were men who found ways to carry it. Some became intensely private, building post-war lives of deliberate normalcy. They married, worked, raised children who sometimes did not learn until their fathers were very old or already dead what those fathers had once prepared to do. Others moved toward public opposition to war and to the ideology that had produced the program. Men who examined the experience from the inside and concluded that the entire structure, the appeals to honor and sacrifice and divine purpose, had functioned as a mechanism for destroying young men. Ryuji Nagatsuka, who flew training missions and waited for orders that arrived too late, wrote a memoir. His position on the command structure that had placed him there was unambiguous. Others held a different view, not defending the program's ideology, but insisting on the distinction between that ideology and the sincerity of the individuals the program consumed. Some of those men gave interviews late in life, in the final decade or two before the generation was gone, when historians recognized that the window for primary testimony was closing. What emerges from those accounts is neither the narrative Japan constructed during the war, nor the one the Western world tends to apply to the subject. It is less convenient than either. Most of these men were well educated. Many were ambivalent about the war even as they volunteered. They had been placed inside a system that offered them meaning, coherence, and a way to matter in a situation where the broader outcome was already determined. The program did not, in the main, produce ideological extremists. It produced men who accepted a defined role in a situation they had not created and could not alter. That is a harder thing to categorize than fanaticism because it does not explain itself as cleanly. The Chiran Peace Museum sits in southern Kyushu, near the airfield where many Toko pilots spent their final days waiting for weather to clear. The museum holds thousands of letters, photographs, and personal effects. It preserves the death poems. It also preserves the other letters, the ones written during the waiting periods, the ones about plum trees and food and younger siblings. The museum has faced periodic criticism for presenting the program in ways that soften the element of institutional coercion, for editing out the accounts of pilots who were frightened, who wept, who required assistance boarding their aircraft, and presenting in their place only the composed expressions in the official photographs. That criticism has a factual basis. But the ordinary letters the museum holds carry something that matters independently of the broader curatorial debate. They are evidence that the men who wrote them were not, despite the wartime rhetoric applied to them, and despite the framing sometimes applied by outside observers afterward, a categorically different kind of human being. They wanted to know whether the plum tree had bloomed. They missed specific foods. They asked after younger siblings by name. They were young men in an impossible position, and the position killed most of them. The ones it did not kill had to find a way to continue living while having once prepared, in full sincerity, to die for something the world determined, before they could act on it, was not worth dying for. There is a detail in the historical record that receives little sustained attention. In the final months of the war, as American forces moved toward the Japanese home islands, the military command began stockpiling pilots and aircraft in preparation for the expected invasion. Operation Ketsu Go, the plan for the defense of Japan itself, allocated thousands of Toko sorties for the moment American ships appeared in coastal waters. Men were trained. Aircraft were cached in dispersal areas away from primary airfields. The pilots waited. The invasion did not come. The atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. The Soviet Union declared war on Japan. The surrender followed shortly after. Some of those pilots, men who had been assigned to fly when the invasion fleet arrived, learned the war was over before they ever took off. They are a subset within a subset, specific enough that even comprehensive histories of the Toko program tend not to linger on them. But they were there. Men who had completed the full psychological process of preparation and farewell, and arrived at the end of it with the war itself dissolving beneath them. What that specific experience produced in the men who went through it is documented only in fragments, a handful of accounts, a small number of late-life interviews. The silence surrounding them is, here more than at any other point in the history of the program, nearly total. One man, interviewed once and briefly, late in his life, said only that he had understood eventually that he was meant to do something with the time he had not expected to have. He did not specify further. He said he was still working on it. He was in his 90s when he said it. The last of these men are gone now, or nearly so. The generation has closed. What remains is what they chose to leave behind, and the far larger record of what they chose not to. The silence is itself a form of documentation. It reflects something about the nature of the experience that available language could not carry, and something about the Japan those men returned to, what that society was able to hold and what it was not. Some experiences are specific enough and extreme enough that the standard instruments for making sense of a life, testimony, memoir, conversation, the gradual work of reflection, do not reach them. These were not men who survived by choosing survival. They survived by weather, by mechanical failure, by the specific geometry of Pacific overcast on specific mornings. The system had processed them as dead. The war ended, and they had to work out, in a country also trying to work out what it had become, how to be men who were still alive. Most of them managed. Most built post-war lives. Most loved people, worked, grew old, and died the ordinary death that the program had told them they had already surrendered. Whether they ever stopped thinking of themselves as men who had once sat in that cockpit and meant it, that is a different question. The accounts that survive suggest the answer. They never stopped. They simply learned to keep living alongside it. If you want to keep exploring the darker side of history, subscribe to The Silent Front. And if this one stayed with you, a like helps more than you might expect. Either way, thank you for watching it through to the end.